This is Grapple Arts Radio.
And we are live. I'm here today with my friend Adam Singer, who runs a gym in Georgia, the Hardcore Gym. Probably best known for being Forrest Griffin's MMA coach during the formative years of Forrest Griffin's career. He's also a jiu-jitsu black belt. He's trained tons of fighters, and he's driving around today, so we'll see what kind of audio quality we have. But I'm really looking forward to picking his brain about MMA and jiu-jitsu and the relationship between these things. And he's an outspoken guy, so I'm sure we'll have lots of good conversation. So welcome to the show, Adam.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So what are you doing driving around?
It is just hard for me to find any place where I'm not going to be bothered by people. And so I figured I'm in Athens, Georgia. I got the air conditioner on in the car, and I'm just going to drive around. It's called the Loop. And I think it's about 10 miles, and I'm just going to drive around the Loop with cruise control on and try not to kill myself and talk to you.
Okay. Well, hopefully we don't have the first live car crash on a podcast. I'm all about firsts, but that's one I'd prefer to avoid.
Snuffcast.
Yeah, the Snuffcast. I think that may be a very, very niche thing. So before we get too heavily into this, let's establish some bona fides. Tell us a little bit about, or tell my audience a little bit about your background in the martial arts, how you got started, and where you're at now.
Sure. I took traditional martial arts as a kid, taekwondo, karate, wrestled in high school, wrestled a little in the Navy. And as soon as I saw the first UFC in '93, I just immediately fell in love with it. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do. Came down to Georgia to go to school, to go to engineering school, and my brother followed me down here, and we just started getting more involved in the martial arts. We got really into Jeet Kune Do for a long time. We would travel to California as much as we could, do a lot of seminars. And the good thing about the Jeet Kune Do community in the early 90s was they were big into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well.
They were an early adopter of that for sure. That and the shoot wrestling as well.
Right. Well, there were Hal Faulkner and Paul Vunak, and Paul was the first Jeet Kune Do person that we trained with and used to train at his house. He understood immediately when he saw the Gracies how much they had to offer. There are stories that he actually took the Gracie Challenge and lost, but there's no, that never ended up on any of the videotapes. But he encouraged all of his students to really dive into jiu-jitsu, and we did that. And after a few years of that with Paul Vunak, we started training with Matt Thornton, who runs a straight blast gym and is incredibly important to me, important figure in my growth as a coach and martial artist, and continued doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And we opened a gym, somewhere around, we started at the university, and we opened the gym off the campus probably 12 years ago, maybe even a little more. And over the years, we've grown, and the Hardcore Gym has grown into what it is today.
And when you say we, that's you and your brother,
right.
Who has fought.
Most people don't separate Rory and I, and you even yourself have no idea sometimes if you're talking to Rory or Adam, but I can assure you it's Adam. I'm the older one. I am the one that never fought in the UFC. My younger brother fought in the UFC and was on TUF. So whenever I say we, I'm speaking of myself and Rory. Even when I say I, I'm usually speaking about myself and Rory.
It's the royal I.
The Singer brothers. That's how we're known.
Perfect. So maybe tell us a little bit about some of the fighters that you guys have trained and have come up through. You guys, obviously there's Forrest Griffin. He's probably the biggest name, right? Right.
Forrest, when we first started doing this, Roy and Forrest came to the conclusion one afternoon that they wanted to fight. And I really had no interest in fighting. So I said, all right, you guys will fight, I'll coach you. And that just sort of started us right there. Over the years, I think I've definitely had over 10 guys fight in the UFC and the WEC before it was taken over by the UFC. Forrest, Brian Bowles, world champion, homegrown world champion in the WEC before that division was in the UFC. So obviously really proud of that. Todd Duffy came up through my gym. Junior Austin Sao got back in the UFC in our gym. Carmelo Moreno, he beat Chet Congo. He fought in the UFC and is trying to make another run back in the UFC. Micah Miller fought in the WEC with us. I know I'm going to forget a lot of names. We've had a lot of names for years move through the gym. Stephen Ledbetter fought Jeff Curran in the WEC. A lot of Bellator guys fight from the gym. And just, we've had a fair share. For a small gym in Athens, Georgia, we've had a fair share of really high-level guys fight in the gym and for the gym.
So when you got started, when you said, okay, I'm going to coach you guys, had you had much coaching experience at that point, as opposed to, teaching martial arts to a group, working more the one-on-one coaching with a fighter who's trying to make a run at the big time?
I had no coaching experience at that point, but I don't know if the aptitude or I think just the way my brain works. I'm an engineer by trade. I'm a scientist by education and personality, and I believe I have some really solid leadership qualities. Matt Thornton really helped me develop how to teach and how to coach and how to help people sort of learn for themselves. And I went and I dove into the pool, and I really started studying coaching. I would pick brains, and being at the UFC, I could sit down and pick Pat Velich's brain. I could pick Robert Folis's brain. I could pick, whoever I could find. And I did that just for years, and I read books, and I studied. Even now, I just took a coaching course with Matt Thornton a couple of months ago. I'm talking to John Kavanaugh, who's probably the top coach in Europe, one of the top coaches in the world. I'm talking to him all the time, refining what I'm doing and learning. Spending time with my coach Roberto Travin, just learning how to coach, and that's what I do. That's my love.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's often underappreciated that fighting and performing and coaching are two different things. Who would you rather learn boxing from, Mike Tyson or Mike Tyson's coach? And I think if you were to try and learn boxing from Mike Tyson, it would be a short and painful experience, and you probably wouldn't learn that much other than what it feels like to wake up from being knocked out. But in bringing people up is a very different thing from actually being able to perform it.
I agree. And what I tried to do, and what I always made sure, is that I was always on the mats doing all the rounds that the guys were doing. So when I was coaching Forrest and I was coaching these other guys, Cale Yarborough, who was on TUF, and my brother and all these guys, Todd, and I was also one of their training partners. So I was never the best guy in the world, but I have decent skills, and I'm very technical. And so it was important for me to also be on the mat performing as I was learning how to coach. And I think those things together gave me a unique perspective and really allowed me to help my guys maybe a little differently than some other coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're seeing that also with a lot of the top coaches now, that they come up through the sport, they were on the mat, maybe they had no competitive career, or maybe they had a small competitive career, but they understand what the fighters are going through. They understand the wear and tear on the body. They understand how these things interconnect. So it's not necessarily learning from Mike Tyson, but it is learning from someone that has the experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, you've done the coaching, you've done the training. Have you done much of the managing, the actual sitting down and negotiating contracts, or is that something that you let other people take care of?
Yeah, I don't. My brother got into that for a little while, and he didn't like it. That is not for me. That is not for me. I don't like talking to promoters. I don't like talking about money. I just they tell me. They've always just told me, hey, this is the opponent that's suggested, and then I just give a yay or a nay. basically. That was my involvement in quote-unquote management.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you mentioned the whole wear and tear on the fighter's body, and that is actually something that I really wanted to talk about with you today. What kind of, can you give us an example? It's always, as opposed to talking in the abstract, can you give us an example of the wear and tear that has happened to some of the fighters that you've trained or that you've known?
Well, I'll use Forrest as an example because, you know, he's the person that, you know, I was there from day one, and I'm still with him at the end of his career as he's retired. He has a shoulder that's barely functional. He's had another knee surgery. You know, he probably has a bunch of other things that hurt as well that because he hasn't had surgery on them, you know, I don't even know about. But at 36 years old, you know, he has a lot of injuries and things that he'll never really recover from. And we're seeing other guys with those same things. And so it's no different with MMA, and it's not just that short window of the professional career they have. It's everything that leads up to that. It's everything they have to do to keep that professional career. You know, football players practice and they play, and then they have an off season. Most MMA guys don't really have an off season. When you're a young amateur, you're a young pro, you're training year-round because you have to be prepared to take fights. And I think the paradigm that is still pervasive in the sport right now is based on really training so hard and going somewhere with all these hard sparring partners and sparring hard and heavy conditioning and heavy strength training. I think it wears on you, and I think the long-term effects, I think we'll see more of that. I think we'll see more guys who, you know, are going to have long-term ramifications to their health, not just from concussive injuries, but just their joints and body parts wearing out. You know, what's Dominic Cruz's knee going to be like in 5 or 10 years?
Let's go back to the concussive part, because, of course, the NFL is going through a whole bunch of legal problems and publicity problems, and the sport of football is going through, I guess, some challenges with people realizing the amount of concussive trauma that happens in that sport and the long-term effects of it. You know, and everything from, I mean, even soccer and rugby and boxing, the accumulated concussive and subconcussive trauma, the effects of those are really becoming understood now. It's not easy to tell when the person's got it, short of dissecting their brain, which you can only do after they're dead. But I think, I mean, my opinion is that the UFC and MMA is going to be going through the same thing very, very shortly. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing class action lawsuits against the UFC, regardless of whatever waivers the fighters signed, or for things like CTE and long-term brain damage. What do you think about that?
See, here's what I feel about that. If anyone sues the UFC in 10 years because they didn't know that they could possibly end up with brain trauma, I think it's bullshit. Now, if you played football in the 1960s and the 1970s before anyone understood this stuff, then, again, you're suing for something that nobody knew. So, to me, it's this sort of a catch-22. Everybody that plays football knows, and they start at a young age, and there's years and years. It's cumulative from Pop Warner and high school and college and pros. It's terrible. Don't get me wrong. It's terrible. But I think that people are pleading this ignorance about knowing what the long-term effects are now. I have a problem with that. The thing about MMA fighters is most of those concussive events, they don't even happen in fights. They happen in training. They happen in sparring, and they happen in training. And I believe that we can change that aspect of the sport and reduce those concussive effects down the road. There are people that go their whole MMA career without ever getting knocked out, without ever taking really hard blows in a fight. It's all during training, because we still have this mentality in MMA where we want to get together with 10 or 15 other top-level guys, put on the gloves, and bang out rounds. And I think we need to move away from that.
What would you suggest as an alternative?
NFL, I'll come back to that. The NFL, I'm not sure they can do anything, because they have concussive events during practice. There's nothing you can do about that. It happens in the game. 200-300-pound guys hitting each other is probably not healthy for the body, but these guys know what they're getting into. And I bet if you ask them, you laid out the evidence, and you ask them, do you still want to do this? They'd still do it, because they're pro athletes, and to get to the highest level of their sport, to achieve what they've achieved, they're willing to make sacrifices, and a lot of times it's health that they'll sacrifice. What can we do in MMA?
I agree with you about the issue of informed consent, right? If you and I, we get presented with this, you're going to go bungee jumping, there's a chance the bungee will snap. Are you okay with dying? Yes, I'll sign on the line here. But I think it's a little bit different when you're talking about, kids in their teens and, people in their early 20s. When you're in your early 20s, when you're in your late teens, you think you're going to live forever. And you also don't think about the consequences of when I'm 40 years old, I won't be able to remember my phone number. That just seems so far away. You're young and you're stupid. And so that's the area that I have difficulty with is not so much adults making these informed decisions, but it's more the youth and the adolescents making those decisions, because I don't think that they're informed. They don't really have a sense of what it's going to be like to live for another 30, 40 years, essentially with Alzheimer's-like symptoms. That's I think the tricky or the gray area for me.
No, I agree with you 100%. The problem is, if they consider the consequences even further, then you can't fight, because you could die in the ring or the cage. You can have injuries that last forever. You could end up with Alzheimer's. There's so many things that can happen that if you start dwelling on those, that's what comes to the forefront for you, then you can't fight. And so it is a catch-22. So coming back full circle, I think it's imperative that as coaches and camps, we change what's going on in the gym. We can't change what happens in a fight. If we have good refs, then hopefully people don't take undue damage. MMA, we don't see that repeated over 36 minutes or 30 minutes of a fight, the repeated blows to the head in most cases. After a fight, we can manage how long it takes to come back and how long we allow people to rest before getting contact. I think there are a lot of things we can do outside of the event itself to minimize the head trauma. We can't get rid of it, obviously, because then we don't have a sport anymore. But I really believe we can minimize it. In football, maybe you can't, because you have to hit each other in practice. But I think in MMA, I think we can work to minimize some of that.
So how can you minimize, if you and I are both training for fights, then how can we train so that during training, that we're not getting hit in the head too hard or too often?
Well, do we need to hit each other in the head that hard? And if we do we need to do it that often? Do we need to do it for round after round after round? Do we need to get a group of guys, put on the gloves and the headgear, and just go at it, 2 or 3 times a week? My buddy John Cavanaugh is getting ready, Conor McGregor, Gunnar Nelson, Hattie, guy from TUF, he's getting 4 guys ready. I know in their camp, they barely hit each other hard in the head. And we just saw Lawler talk about not sparring. We just saw Johnny Hendricks talk about not taking head contact. And I think hopefully those guys will start to pave the way for that type of atmosphere. And it starts at the coaching level, obviously. And it
the coach needs to keep the egos in check so that the two guys don't start brawling and, oh, yeah, I'll hit you.
You have to keep the egos in check. You have to make sure that the structure of the program is not based on sparring, but it's based on skill training. And you really have to monitor the contact. You really have to monitor the level of training. I'm not saying you can get rid of it in practice. Guys got to hit each other. Guys have to feel that, especially earlier in their career. I think as a career goes, you probably need a lot less of that. But I think we can change that. You know, look at all the injuries we're starting to see on these UFC cards. We're starting to lose fights and multiple fights from every card. To me, that's an issue of training as well. We still have this mentality in MMA that when you sign the fight, you start a quote-unquote camp where you go from, whatever you were training at to 100, training 2 times a day and banging away and bringing in guys and round after round. I think we can change that. I think we can change that mentality a bit. And I think it's already started.
But do you not advocate guys having camps?
I'm not advocating anything. Just
okay.
What I'm postulating is that our guys should stay at some level of ability all year round. Our guys should be in some level of shape within some level of weight all year round. That way, when they sign a fight, whether it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 12 weeks, there doesn't have to be this dramatic difference. I believe, and some of this I'm still working out, I'm testing it, and Kavanaugh's testing it, and friends of mine are testing it. I almost believe that outside of camp, we should be training 2 a day, mostly skill work, but 2 a day. And when we hit camp, shrink down the amount of training we're doing. The intensity can go up a bit, but the amount of training shrinks, which is counter to the way most people train. Most people are very lackadaisical in the off-season or outside of camp. And then when camp starts, they start training 2 or 3 times a day. It's this 12-week, countdown. It's this, and I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to do it, and I'm hoping that it sort of changes as time goes on.
Well, I'm no fighter, but I have competed in different sports, and it's strange, and I've thought about this before, that sometimes my best performances came from the shortest notice. And I think maybe it was just because I hadn't had time to grind myself down with, essentially overtrain by having had notice. Oh, God, the next competition's in 6 weeks. I better train really hard. And then you've got all those accumulated injuries and fatigue, and you've never had the chance to recover. But on short notice, sometimes, maybe it's purely psychological because you haven't sat there worrying about it for 6 weeks. And so the stress of it is less. But maybe it's also physiological. Maybe it's, you're just going along, you're training, you're feeling okay, and then boom, you're competing.
Right. It's part psychological, it's part physiological. What I would like to see is more effort put into recovery during the camp phase or the peaking phase, if you will. Maybe camp's not the right word. Maybe we're peaking for a fight. I'd like to see more time put into recovery, even if it's like almost 1-to-1. If you're doing 1 2-hour session a day, I'd like to see, obviously 2 hours of recovery work is difficult, but almost the same level of care put into recovery as we do into the training sessions. I would also like to see more tools being used that science has to offer us to monitor recovery. And then we can modify the workouts a lot more specifically for each fighter as they move through this period of time. this peaking phase, if you will.
So what are some of the tools that you've found that are useful for recovery for the people you've worked with?
So there are some very simple tools like testing grip strength in the morning, testing your pulse rate in the morning. Finger tap testing will equate to recovery. And there are some more high-tech tools now like HRV monitoring and things like that. And then as more money comes into the sport and there's more things available, we can add hormone testing, we can add nutritional testing. All these things that are already at the NFL level, they're already at the pro sports level, will start to trickle down to us. And then I think we'll get a better picture of what's happening to guys as they're training and as they're peaking for their fights.
So those are all tools that can essentially determine how overtrained you are or how drained down your reserves are. But let's say we do that. Let's say today I've been training hard, and today my pulse rate, my morning resting heart rate is elevated by 12 beats a minute. My grip strength is down by 25%, and I'm just feeling a bit rotten. What then, as a coach, do you have me do? Because, of course, I want to train, right? Oh, my God, I've got to fight 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now. I got to train. I got to be tough here. So what do you then do or tell me?
So in a perfect world, I don't fucking care what you want to do. I'm saying that in the sense that if the numbers or the way you feel or the way you look or whatever, however I determine your performance level, it doesn't matter what you want. It just matters what the evidence is. So if your numbers look like that, then you don't have to work out today. Maybe you do yoga. Maybe you do a stretching session. Maybe I look at your calories. Someone's going to look at your calories, your nutritionalist, and see if it's equating to too much of a drop of calories or a lack of hydration or you're not sleeping well. Overtraining and lack of and difficulty sleeping often go together. We have to look at all the data. It's a science. We got to look at all the data, and if that's what your numbers look like, the athlete has to trust the coach enough that when the coach says, listen, I want you to come in today, just do a little bit of jump rope, a little bit of shadow boxing, and then do an hour of yoga or whatever that is, that the athlete understands why, trusts the coaching staff, and will go do that. Weight cutting, obviously, as you're peaking and you're cutting more weight and that becomes more of a concern, then we have to pay even more attention to your recovery because we're taking one of the recovery tools away from you. Sleep is one, nutrition is another. If we start reducing your nutrition, then we have to even monitor closer.
Mm-hmm. Because you're not only cutting calories, you're also cutting nutrients too.
Right, you're cutting all the things that you need to recover. And so we really have to pay attention to that. And those things are, camps and coaches are starting to pay more attention to that, but I still think we're in this survival of the fittest type mode in most gyms, where the top guys will be the top guys and the other guys will get washed out of the sport. But I think there's a lot more we can do for our athletes to help more of our athletes achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing we really can do if our athlete – that's not true. I was about to say durability of our athletes, we have some control over that, but there's some of that we don't control. And we see that in all sports. We see these guys with all the talent in the world who just can't stay healthy, whether it's biomechanical issues, whether it's just some weak structural issues. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about that. But what we don't want to do is wear our athletes down in practice. We don't want to destroy their bodies in practice.
Well, then there are also closet trainers. A friend of mine used to play high-level rugby for Wales, and he said that one of the biggest toughest guys on the team, who incidentally ended up coming out of the closet years later. But biggest, roughest, toughest guys on the team would go do all the team practices. Then he'd sneak off at night when the other guys were going, drinking and clubbing. I guess for obvious reasons he didn't want to go clubbing with them, but he'd go and work out some more, right? So but he'd keep that quiet. He didn't want anybody to know that he was doing additional workouts on top of the workouts that he's doing. So
that's exactly what Forrest did. So if I said, hey, today I just want you to take it easy, let's do some shadow box, some jump rope, and some pad work, he'd say yes because he knew not to argue with me, and then he'd do that, and then he'd go home, and then I find out he went to Atlanta to spar with one of his buddies. He always did that. He was such a pain in the ass when it came to that.
Well, it's understandable. It's an understandable desire, right? You just want to make sure every base is covered, that you're doing everything that you can, but sometimes doing everything you can means doing nothing.
Well, you should do as little as possible to get the greatest effect. To me, that should be the goal of your practice, to get the desired effects with the least amount of work. Any coach can have a quote-unquote killer workout and guys puking and guys this, but every coach can't get guys better day after day, month after month, year after year. And our goal is to do that. And so as a coach, we want to look at the minimal amounts of work, and we shouldn't really go past that. And then
what amount of conditioning and what type of conditioning is required for most people who want to fight at a high level? Obviously, it's athlete specific and what they're going to need, but what on average do you find that most guys need?
So the best answer I can give to that right now is I'm not totally sure. I go back and forth on this a lot. We went through the period a little while ago where it was all about, caveman training, and everyone bought a tire and a sledgehammer. And then we had, and everyone is doing sprints, and everyone is doing crazy Olympic lifting, and everyone's got kettlebells. And I don't know how much of that is really necessary, if at all. So the truth is, I don't know what the answer is, but as I've gotten more experience in this, and I'm going on, at some point I'm going to be an MMA coach going on almost 20 years, I think less is more in strength and conditioning also applies. I think there's a baseline of strength that most athletes need to accomplish their goals. And once those are achieved, then I don't see any reason to kill yourself in the gym lifting weights and stuff.
Can you give me, or can you give us an example of what you might think a minimum standard is? We got a 200-pound fighter, six foot tall, 200 pounds. How strong should that guy be at a minimum? Obviously, there's going to be freaks who are way off the chart, way, way, way above that, thanks to genetics and thanks to massive doses of steroids and short arm.
I'm not trying to be evasive, but, how does that guy fight? What is that guy? Is that guy going to clinch people and put them on the cage and wear them out with the upper body? Or is that guy going to dance around and stick and move around and sprawl? Is that guy got super slick jiu-jitsu? Or is that guy all about just explosive, getting up and pushing the pace? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. So
I'm not trying to be evasive, but it is an individual thing, and it's got to be based on the fighter's weaknesses, and it's got to be based on the fighter's game, on the structure of what they're good at and what they do and how they fight. But what I'll tell you is this. You see very few UFC fights lost because one guy was so much stronger than the other. We see plenty of fights lost because one guy was technically superior in an area. We see a tremendous number of fights lost because of cardiovascular conditioning. But we rarely see fights lost where you're just like, well, that guy was just stronger than the other guy. He had a bigger bench press or he deadlifted more weight. So to me, the strength and conditioning or the conditioning, it's got to start sports specific, and then we go from there. I don't know, for a lot of years, I never understood why boxers ran so much, why boxers did so much road work. And then over time, you start to realize that boxing is an aerobic sport. There are short bursts, but the recovery between those short bursts and the ability to keep moving and hitting is aerobic. And so I would rather see guys spend their time doing the sport-specific conditioning, and then build off of there. Does that make sense?
It's an interesting point that, I can think of only a few examples where, sheer strength, obviously sheer strength has ruled the day in certain cases, or, escaping a submission or lifting somebody up. But I would agree with you 100% that, 8 times out of 10, when it's a conditioning, when you lose because of conditioning, it's because of your aerobic and your anaerobic conditioning, not because of your muscular endurance or because of your maximum strength. So, and I mean, personally, for myself, with my jiu-jitsu, I've tried sprints, I've tried long cardio, I've tried circuit training. It always comes back. I always feel best when I'm doing long cardio, when I'm doing a couple sessions of long cardio a week. Man, it just, maybe it's just my game, right? Maybe it's just me, but that's where I feel best. So I'm pretty biased, and I do have to agree with you about the cardio is king. It seems like a lot of people come to that conclusion after going down a whole lot of different roads.
The easiest overall prescription I would give is very simple weight training done as minimally as possible, mixed with some level of cardiovascular training. And I wanted to start, everything starts with the training itself. Mm-hmm. And then it goes from there. So is it more beneficial to get road work, or would it be more beneficial to hit the heavy bag? Would it be more beneficial to do sprint work, or would it be more beneficial to do a good hand pad session? Now, if you've got time and recovery to do both, then we start to look at what can be added. What can you recover from? What can you physically handle? I like long, steady state aerobic training as well. I like it even as a recovery device. Put on your heart rate monitor, get up to about 135 or 140, and just walk. Walk uphill wearing a vest. I think it's a good recovery tool, and I think it helps your heart rate. Joe Jamieson is doing some really good work in that area. Who is Demetrius Johnson's strength and conditioning coach. And there are very few guys on the planet that can keep up with Demetrius Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying there's no place for weight training. I think that as a young athlete, it's important to build a base of strength. I think it makes you more I think it helps you against being injured. I think it helps stabilize your joints. I think it helps you do things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. But the focus on strength and conditioning over the focus on skill work, I think that's a mistake.
Yeah. I would agree with that. If you want to get really contrarian, people always talk about sport-specific conditioning. Okay, we'll go to jiu-jitsu for a second. So you're doing jiu-jitsu, a lot of pulling in jiu-jitsu, a lot of gripping in jiu-jitsu. Therefore, all your conditioning or most of your conditioning should be pulling and gripping. The contrarian view there, then I think there's a good point there, is if you're already doing all this pulling and gripping when you're doing your sport, you should be doing the opposite. You should be, working the muscles that you aren't working to prevent injuries. If you just become this, I don't know, let's say you've got, you're always pulling with your right hand because of whatever techniques you do. And then you go to the gym, it's like, okay, well, I better get even better at pulling with my right hand. You're going to asymmetrically develop your body, and that's going to set you up for major pain down the road. So the contrarian argument is, I guess it ties in with what you said about keeping your weight training as simple as possible, is to make sure that you're getting a balanced physique, that you don't have one set of muscles that's way, way, way stronger than another set of muscles. Your pushing muscles are as strong as your pulling muscles. Your upper body is sort of as strong as your lower body. The front of your body is, as well developed as the back of your body. And now, then you can do your sport-specific stuff by doing your sport, not by doing the one-handed tractor tire pull over and over and over.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We have to build balance. In the early stages of the career of the athlete in any sport, I believe that building a balanced, strong body is going to give you the most bang for your buck over time. Mm-hmm. And then we do the sport. And then we identify weaknesses, and we have to really think, are these weaknesses we can fix through strength and conditioning, or are these weaknesses we can fix with technical ability? Are these things, so we really have to, we can't just throw things at the problem and assume they're going to fix them. We really have to be smarter than that. We have to be willing to test, and we have to build up, it takes time. To coach athletes at a high level takes time because there's a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of failing, and there's a lot of having to change if you want to keep being successful. And at the amateur level, part of the problem is at the amateur level, you can win a lot of fights, and at the low-level pros, you can win a lot of fights as being more athletic than people. And so people take that to mean that that's how we should continue training. And what happens is those guys get weeded out because they lack the technical ability. Once they meet a guy who's the same athletic ability plus technique, then they lose. Mm-hmm. So I believe the technical training, the skill training has to make up the majority of your work, especially when you're young, but even as you move through. I think that people abandon technical work too early in their training, too early in their career, replace it with sparring, replace it with intense training, and I think that's part of the reason we see some lack of technique even at the UFC level. We see people, even now, we see guys on TV whose boxing is rudimentary at best, whose footwork is subpar, whose wrestling is not where it should be, whose jiu-jitsu is not where it should be. Because all of those areas need technical work. And if all you do is come in and spar, come in and roll, come in and wrestle, it's really difficult to build that.
Yeah, you'll be tough but not skilled.
You'll be tough, and if you're athletic, that can take you further. Being athletic is always better than being not athletic. Athletic plus a little skill work can get you into the UFC, but at the end of the day, the guys that are the champions or the guys in the sport for a long time have a balance of that. And again, that's what I'm stressing is we have to find the proper balance with all of this. How much sparring, how much skill work, how much strength and conditioning, are we recovering enough?
So when it comes to technical training, I sort of see there being, you have your striking modalities, you have your clinching and takedown modalities, and you have your ground fighting modalities. So let's go through those sort of one at a time and talk about what your preferences are. For striking, I think the two dominant paradigms in MMA are either you're coming at it from a Western boxing perspective or you're coming at it from a Muay Thai perspective. Then there are a few other guys, like Machida, who are coming at it from sort of a hybrid Shotokan karate thing. But I think it's fair to say that 90% of the guys are either boxing and or Muay Thai, which of those do you think is more applicable to MMA? If I had to choose, Adam, I can either go to this Muay Thai school or a boxing school, and I want to fight in the UFC in 5 years. What would you tell me?
So if you're going to hold my feet to the fire there, I say boxing.
Okay, why?
Well, first off, I'm biased because that's how I built my guys. That's what I like, because I think that the footwork, I think the ability to change ranges, I think the ability to add your shots, your sprawls, and I think you can add the kicking later. If you develop a strong boxing framework, I think you can add the kicking to it. And I think that we see that with Kane. I think we see that with Edgar. We see that with other people. Don't get me wrong. Thai boxing is fantastic. Okay? It is a fantastic art. But if you're holding my feet to the fire, I like boxing because I believe you can be a champion and never, ever throw a kick. But I don't believe you can be a champion and never, ever throw a punch.
Okay. And, of course, we're making this an either-or thing, and in real life
right.
It's not either-or. But
so in real life, I like to call my guys box kickers.
I've never heard that before. That's a good one.
We'll trademark that right now.
Yeah.
So I spend the majority of our time on really technical boxing, but it changes, obviously, because of MMA, and I'm very cognizant of that. So the ranges change a bit. The defense changes. The footwork changes. So it's let's call it a modified boxing, which is basically hand dominant. And then we can add some of the more effective kicking. And I've studied with Rob Kamen. I just did a Dutch kickboxing seminar a couple weeks ago with someone. I studied Rufus. I love the Dutch style. So if you had said boxing versus the Dutch style, I may have wavered a little more, but I'm still going to say boxing.
Well, in this imaginary world where it's either one or the other, what about wrestling? What do you think? More of a Greco for MMA? If the goal is to become good at MMA, should I go into Greco or should I go into more of a freestyle wrestling?
So I'm going to change that question a little bit. Either you grew up wrestling or you didn't, right? If you grew up wrestling, you probably were exposed to a little of all of it. In America, it's folk style, but most kids do some Greco and some freestyle. If you grew up wrestling, then you need to learn how to use that wrestling in MMA. So you have to adapt that wrestling for MMA. And we've seen guys that are very good at it, and we've seen guys with high wrestling pedigrees that are not very good at it. So you need the right coach that understands how to mix striking and wrestling. If you didn't wrestle before and you need to get up to speed so you can fight against wrestlers, then I think you have to focus on the cage first and foremost. And I think that you have to focus on being able to get up, because a good wrestler will take you down. And, if you're throwing punches at someone, the wrestler will time it and take you down. So you have to be one of those people who is just constantly getting up, pushing the pace, popping back up, defending and getting back up, and then spend a lot of time on the cage, because I'm not a high-level wrestler, but on the cage I can take a high-level wrestler down. I can't take a high-level wrestler down in the middle of a wrestling mat. It doesn't happen. I've tried it. I can't do it. You give me a D1 All-American wrestler, put us in the middle of a wrestling mat and say go, I'm going to get taken down 9 out of 10 times. You put us on a cage, I can hold my own, I can defend takedowns, and I can score some takedowns. Does that make sense? So when I'm building a fighter, if they never wrestled before, then when we're doing the stand-up game, we're spending a lot of time working on the distancing, the footwork, being a little lower, controlling that distance, and really spending a lot of time getting back up. Not letting the wrestler, even if we hit our butts on the mat, not letting the wrestler get our upper body pinned. because then it really starts to suck. And then, then we enter the jiu-jitsu world. Then we spend a lot of time on the cage. And I'll have my guys shoot and drive people to the cage, even if it's a real high-level wrestler, drive them to the cage, because I really believe that the cage changes things that much. And I believe I can teach my guys to take wrestlers down on the cage, to defend on the cage, a lot better than I can in the middle of the cage, or the middle of the octagon.
Mm-hmm.
If you wrestled at a high level, then we just spend a ton of time with our punch shot training. We spend a ton of time getting the timing down for you to punch and shoot, or for you to be punched and shoot underneath it. And I just took a lot of that, just that idea of those reps from Sean Shirk and Greg Nelson. Just punch, shot, punch, shot, punch, shot. Just if you wrestled every day, go into the gym, get with a partner, and work punch, shot. Get with a partner and have them throw punches at you, defend them, and go underneath them. If you start doing that, you can really start to translate your wrestling into MMA.
Then you can start controlling whether you stay on the feet or go to the ground. And
you control everything.
Yeah. And there, ladies and gentlemen, you have the secret to one of the major secrets to George St. Pierre's success.
Yeah, I mean, in George St. Pierre, it's his timing that makes what he does so incredibly powerful. He just, when the fight starts with Johnny Hendricks, and as soon as Hendricks puts his feet flat to throw a punch, GSP takes him down. It changes the entire dynamic of that fight within the first 20 seconds. And that is a level of timing that we all want to strive for. It's what separates him from other people that are trying to do the same thing. It's beautiful timing.
Okay, so now we've been striking with Dutch style kickboxing or box kick or whatever, and we've gone to the ground either with a Greco throw or a double leg shot or whatever, and we're now talking on the ground in a position or with the shoulders flat on the back. So now you said this is jiu-jitsu country, but when's the last time you saw a submission from the closed guard in MMA? They're pretty rare now. So how do you adapt your jiu-jitsu to be MMA applicable?
So the first thing we work on is getting back up. So wall walking, cage walking, whatever you want to call it, getting back to your feet. Because no matter how good you are at jiu-jitsu, if you're on your back, the refs see you as losing the fight. It's very rare. Even if no damage is being done, it's very rare for the refs to view you as winning the fight. So we have to focus first and foremost on getting up. From there, I think, and I agree with you 100%, we don't see guys submitting people off the back anymore. To me, sweeps become the key factor now in MMA. And sweeps can be maybe I think they're underutilized, but I think as we keep going and guys get to a higher level in MMA, I think we'll see more sweeps, which can then lead to getting back up or submissions, but at a minimum, we can create a scramble or we can end up on top. So for me, I like to focus on, to me, there are four things that are going on when we hit the ground. We got to survive, okay? We got to survive. Then we're going to sweep, submit, or stand up. And submit is probably the last of those things because it's the hardest one to do, especially later in the fight. So we get up, or sweep, and we can cycle those things together, and then maybe a submission appears. But the idea of being on your back, flat on your back, taking, even if it's just minor punishment, trying to submit someone, you're going to lose the fight.
Mm-hmm.
You can not end up with any real facial damage, not get hit with any real shots, but you're going to lose the fight.
So then if you are on your back in an MMA context, it sounds like you're suggesting that positions like the butterfly guard might be better because they lead more easily to the stand-up and to the sweep rather than the closed guard and hunting for a submission. Are there specific positions that you like, that you would recommend to your fighters to explore? Obviously, if they're really, really good at a position, you might not want to change that. But if they're coming to you virginal and fresh, what directions would you steer them in?
Well, I think first thing is I steer my guys all towards spending a lot of time in jiu-jitsu. Now, I know jiu-jitsu has been minimized in modern MMA a little bit, but if you don't have jiu-jitsu, as soon as you get taken down, you're going to be in super trouble. So I really stress just good, solid fundamentals of jiu-jitsu. Then, I do like butterfly guard. I like half butterfly. I'd like to see guys open a little more and attack from an open guard a little more, feet on the hips, pushing away, and start creating things from there. You know, if you got a killer closed guard, and I don't know who in MMA really has a killer closed guard, it still gets so difficult to finish anything with the sweat. So difficult to finish anything with the cage. It still gets so difficult to set anything up with the amount of time you have. So right now I think, closed guard is not necessarily, I'm not saying it's dead in MMA because you got to survive there, but it's probably a secondary thing at this point for us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, fair enough. And I think the fact that people have been working against, that's the dominant paradigm of the ground and pounder, right? Okay, we're going to work some ground and pound. Where are we going to ground and pound from? Well, probably going to be in the closed guard. And so that's what a lot of people have trained specifically against. Whereas I've never seen guys go to the gym and go, okay, you go in butterfly guard, get the bear hug, and now we're going to work ground and pound that, ground and pounding against that. So I think it's what people are aware of and what they're working against. And also, the lack of any kind of clothes. And even the presence of a T-shirt in the street would change things quite a bit because now you're sopping up a lot of that sweat that's making it so hard to keep somebody's posture down and keep them under control.
Well, let's look at it this way. If I took a guy, a D1 wrestler, and just trained him what not to do in your closed guard, what not to do with his arms, what not to do with his posture, and then I sent him up to you, that guy, even though your jiu-jitsu is top-notch, that guy is going to be a pain in the ass to deal with. Now, because of his balance, because of his conditioning, because of his power, now he can also punch you. It becomes a very difficult proposition for the bottom man in closed guard. Mm-hmm. Now, if you had 20 minutes or 30 minutes to wear this guy out, to set things up, to figure out his reactions, his responses, then you're going to submit him every time. But at a 5-minute clip, as it gets sweatier, no shirt on.
And of course, there is more to jiu-jitsu than the guard, and controlling other positions as well. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot of the, you look at the huge number of fights that have been finished from rear mount, either with a ground and pound from rear mount and or a rear naked choke from rear mount. And yeah, I know wrestlers say that that there's a grapevining and rear mounting, but really the rear mount came from jiu-jitsu. So that's, sure. I don't know what the statistics are, but I'm guessing that it's got to be up near 50% of all submissions are from the back, probably. So I guess that's where the art is still immediately useful as an offensive tool as opposed to a defensive survival tool.
And I think the other thing we're seeing is these no-gi choke wizards now. I think we're seeing, especially during scrambles. If you make one mistake during a scramble, you're seeing these guillotines slapped on so fast and so strong now with all these different variations. I think that the no-gi choke game is really moving very quickly right now over the last few years especially. And as that moves into MMA more, it makes everything even more dangerous because now you're on bottom even creating space and coming up opens up the neck attacks and things now that we never saw before. And so I don't think we're done evolving on the ground yet. I just think that some things are being de-emphasized and some things are being more emphasized. Like if I was going to ground and pound, when we work ground and pound, like you said, we work from all positions, but I would prefer to be half guard top to ground and pound.
Oh, you're of the Randy Couture school of thought there.
Right, and he gets full credit for that. He was the first guy to really put that out. And you saw in this school in Forrest. Forrest would come back from Vegas after being at Randy's for a while, and he was like half guard top. And so Randy deserves all that credit. And that's, so you're seeing that more and more. So now the half guard bottom game will really have to develop. The good thing about that, to me, is that half guard bottom offers you a lot of sweep opportunities. And so coming full circle, we might see more sweeping and things coming back into MMA.
Well, let's see if we can, I'll give Dana a call, and we'll see if we can do two things to modify the UFC. We'll see about getting rid of gloves to reduce concussive head trauma. I think that'll, we'll go back 20 years. And we'll see about putting gis on all the fighters so we can start seeing some of this weird lapel-based play in the middle of all this punching. That'd be an interesting experiment to try. It's never going to happen. Actually, I'm going way back in the day. You probably saw it. There were gi MMA tournaments in Japan. I did see footage of guys fighting with full contact punches, full contact kicks, wearing the gi, and you're allowed to use the gi. This was back in the early 90s, so that would be an interesting sport.
I've seen some stuff recently. I think it was called Combat Sambo or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's fun to do it in your class. If you have a gym, if you're listening and you have a gym, and I know we do all our ground and pound in our shorts and our T-shirt, but if you've never put all the guys in gis and then said everyone put on your MMA gloves, first off, you get weird looks from everyone, but it is a very fun class to have where you say, okay, we're doing gi jiu-jitsu like the old days. You could punch each other. You get a different dynamic, and it is a very fun evening, and everyone is like, we got to do that again.
And I don't know what I'm assuming the weather in Georgia is pretty hot right now. But
yeah, my air conditioning bill is ridiculous right now, but it's still fun.
But for a significant portion of North America, for a significant part of the year, you're not running around wearing, nothing but board shorts. You are usually wearing a jacket or a shirt or something that, to take us back to self-defense, how gauche of me to bring up self-defense in a discussion about MMA. Most of the time when you're defending yourself, you're not wearing Speedos and the other guy isn't wearing gloves. And, some of that weird-ass, crazy lapel wrapping stuff might possibly have a combative application. I don't know about the whole worm guard thing that's making the rounds now in the jiu-jitsu community and it's creating so much controversy, but, who am I to say? It should all be field tested. Well, I'll give Dana a call and see if I can get rid of the gloves and add the gi in.
See, it's the nature of sports, and I am a huge NFL football fan, and I think there's nowhere in the world where you see evolution of a sport as quickly as you do in the NFL because of the money, because of the resources, because of the athletes. And it's just what happens is you have a set of rules, and the sport evolves to beat those rules. And you see it in MMA, and you see it in jiu-jitsu, and that will not stop. As long as there's a set of rules and there's a way to win within those rules, guys will try and game it. It is natural. At some level, it's healthy. At some level, it gets strange. But, the worm guard is not the craziest thing we're going to see. And MMA had this period where it was just like, take a guy down, hump him for 15 minutes, and you could win. You could be a world champion. We see evolution. It's just constant evolution. It's why I love sports. But I think just for fun, I think putting on your gi and punching each other in the face is a good time.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end our conversation today, Adam. So if people want to train with you or find out more about you, your hardcore gym, well, you tell them how to find you.
All right, so www.thehardcoregym.com, thehardcoregym.com. Phone number is 706-850-8444. And just one thing I didn't get to say that I want to make sure is I really love training regular people. To me, I want people to come in and be martial artists first. You know, my favorite thing is jiu-jitsu, and over the last few years I've become crazy about the gi. I want people to come in and be martial artists, and then if people want to fight or they have an aptitude for fighting, then we can go ahead and do that. But I want people to be martial artists first. I think that allows me to help the most people. It allows me to work with the most people. And I think it gives you a lifelong pursuit as opposed to coming in to fight, fighting for a few years, and then not ever doing this anymore. You know, every fighter, I want to see him earn a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I want to see martial arts become an integral part of their lives. And I think in the long run, it's healthy.
Well, there you go. I couldn't agree with you more. Have a great day, Adam. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Podcast listeners, there's a pretty good chance that you're listening to this on your smartphone, right? You're walking around, you got your smartphone in your pocket, you got your earbuds in, you're listening. If you've got a smartphone and you do jiu-jitsu, then you should check out my free Roadmap for BJJ app. This is a video-based app. It's an app that goes on your phone. You can check out the different sections. It's got different techniques. It's got different positions. And it breaks down the big picture of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for you so that you're not going to be so lost on the ground when you're training. So you're going to know kind of, sort of what you should be doing in every position, along with the specific techniques that you should be using. So if you go to grapplearts.com/roadmap, there'll be links there to get this app for free, both in the iTunes store, if you've got an iPhone, or in the Android store, if you've got an Android phone. There's also Kindle versions of it out there as well. Once again, you can grab that at grapplearts.com/roadmap. That'll point you in all the right directions to get this app, whatever kind of phone you have.